Previously, the cultist the group was trying to interrogate pushed every button that Tornak had. Tornak found himself back in the Shadow Realm, at least in his mind, and he brutally killed the cultist when he saw a vision of his brother. The cultist's body turned to liquid when he died, and Zaya carefully squirreled away the pendant that the cultist had on him. Not that anyone else realized it, which I'm sure won't come back to bite her at any point. Keelan arrived in Fluvadara before the others, since he was on a separate ship, and he got information about the status of things. A captain in the Westwind fleet told Keelan about explosives in the sewers that needed to be prepared to be set off, but were being guarded by what was presumably shadow spawn. All of the breakers in the area had already fled, so the group was the closest thing they had to experts. He also advised him that the Luminous wanted to speak to Sean. Upon hearing that the Praetors might be getting their dark tears from the Aetherglen crater, and that Keelan at least might be heading there, he also provided Keelan with documents that would probably cause uprisings in the area. Then Keelan visited the Wayward Cartographer Society to give them the rubbing of the waystone he'd gotten at the bottom of the river. He was given badges for himself and the others in the group, as that was enough to earn membership. He put on his and shoved the others in his pocket for the time being, although he definitely considered tossing them aside for a moment. While there, he was also told about a series of small canals that could be used to avoid the blockade at the mouth of the river. Keelan went to the Wyvern's Claw to see if it was open, and it was confirmed that it would be available for accommodations for one more night. He glanced at the job board to get an idea of what was listed, and then he headed back to Sava. Around that time, the rest of the group arrived on their ship. Keelan gave the rest of the group the bare minimum information before leaving. Taria and Zaya went to find the local breaker bar. It was abandoned, but they managed to find some supplies that had been left behind. They also drank some very bad wine and had a conversation that for once didn't lead to screaming or bloodshed. Meanwhile, Sean, Oz, and Tornak went to speak to the captain that Keelan had previously spoken to. He quickly realized that Sean was the representative of House Valenta he'd been told about, although he was surprised to see that she was missing an arm. He became very sympathetic once she implied it had been done by the cult of Thalakros and had just happened recently. He gave them a bit more information since Sean was with them, and explained that it would help their cause significantly if Sean spoke with some of the noble families about the cult of Thalakros apparently having ties to the Praetors. She agreed to see what she could do. The captain also gave them a spool of wire to attach to the explosives, which Sean let Oz take as it was heavy. They left the ship and made their way to the Wyvern's Claw, and just outside was a familiar white carriage of the Luminous. Sean braced herself and climbed inside. She was given a letter in a handwriting that she recognized as that of her father. When she opened it, she found that it was a declaration that named her the legitimate daughter of Aurelius Valenta and stated that the Empire would now legally recognize her as Sean Valenta. Sean very purposely kept her expression blank as she understood the numerous implications of the letter, especially when it was followed by a very obvious threat that the Luminous would keep her family safe as long as she did what was expected of her. She was also told to keep the remaining gold bars, as they were certain she could put them to use. She was told to speak to representatives of Houses Idrin, Azari, Stormrider, and Koltar to keep them fighting against the Empire. Once the message had been delivered, and Sean agreed that she understood what was expected of her, she somewhat clumsily climbed out of the carriage since her balance was off due to her missing an arm. And she stealthily hid the device that Alonso had given her without being noticed in the process. Inside the Wyvern's Claw, Sean filled the others in on what she'd learned. They decided that, for the time being, they'd do what was being asked of them. There were clearly lots of strings being pulled, but all they could do was what they thought was best. The group split up after their talk. Taria and Tornak went to get some supplies and send off some packages. Zaya had a short talk with Sean. Keelan disappeared into his room to work on alchemy, and Oz followed him for some apologies and a bit of a heart-to-heart. Then Keelan went to talk to Sean, with a potion he'd just developed in town. He made no promises, but he thought there was at least a chance it might be able to regrow her arm. She agreed to let him try, and it worked. The arm she'd lost the day before slowly regrew as if new over the course of the next few minutes. Sean had a small breakdown that she'd been putting off, while Keelan tried to comfort her as best he could. They talked a little before both of them used magic to show each other what their respective mothers had looked like, since losing them was something they had in common. Tornak pulled out his lute for the first time since coming back to play some music. There was lightning outside, and Tornak thought he saw an image of his brother smiling in the aftermath. Taria pulled Zaya and Oz aside to show them a bit more about how her magic and journal worked. She also gave them a little bit more information about her past. Once again, no screaming or bloodshed. Baby steps. Later that night, Zaya headed outside to try to set up a nice place for Keelan to sleep. She failed horribly, but she tried. That led to the two of them trying to talk, even though it was quite clear that Zaya and Keelan saw the world in very different ways. When Zaya asked Keelan if he was still planning on leaving, he didn't seem quite as certain as he had earlier. He mentioned that part of it was because the potion had gone so well, and when Zaya confusedly asked what he meant, he directed her back to Sean. In the aftermath of their talk, Zaya went up to talk to Sean as directed, and she was shocked to see that she had 2 arms again, especially when Sean explained why that was the case. Everyone settled in to sleep for the night. And that is where we left off.